The outside world seems to believe the Atlanta Falcons are front runners in the NFC South because of Kirk Cousins, their new quarterback. But James Yarko of Locked On Bucks says the Falcons are not front runners in the NFC South because of their new quarterback, Kirk Cousins. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, free and available. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this episode. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com. A part of Sports Illustrated, here with you Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you for coming through today. Everydayers, appreciate you for coming through every day. On today's episode, we are going to continue our series of covering 2024 Commanders opponents with conversations about the Carolina Panthers, New Orleans Saints, Atlanta Falcons, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers of the NFC South. We are going to start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as defending champions, and they should be favorites to win the NFC South for a fourth straight season, according to Locked On Bucks. If you want to discuss this episode, or anything else going on with the Washington Commanders, all you got to do is shoot me a text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders, and you can text me about anything going on with the Washington Commanders, fantasy football, vacations, really anything you want to talk about. Reach out to me anytime, and I will get back to you as soon and as often as I can. Again, joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to get in on that today. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers should be the NFC South Division favorites despite the arrival of Kirk Cousins to the Atlanta Falcons. In fact, James Yarko of Locked On Bucks says they should be favorites in part because of the arrival of Kirk Cousins to the Atlanta Falcons.
I mean, you go back and you take a look at Kirk Cousins' body of work, and he seems to be pretty average throughout the regular season, right? Below average on primetime, below average in the playoffs. He's going from a team where he had at any given point Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook couldn't get the job done, and now all of a sudden he's downgrading at receiver, probably on par at running back. So, you know, they're the sexy new team and they're the new hotness. It reminds me of kind of the New Orleans Saints last year, right? Everyone kind of jumped on the Saints bandwagon, and the Bucs were kind of the forgotten team. And as Jason Light pointed out, that's kind of how they like it. So you take a look at the Bucs and where they didn't stay the same, they upgraded. They didn't lose any key players. They didn't downgrade at any position. So they should be in the driver's seat for the NFC South again.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, because obviously if Kirk Cousins isn't going to win the division, it's either going to be Baker, Derek Carr, Bryce Young. I think most people will probably put Baker and the Buccaneers in that second spot. I think some people maybe have the Saints there. I think that's a little premature, but what gives you confidence that Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to repeat again as the NFC South Division champs?
I think Baker being kind of more comfortable in his environment, right? Last year, it was a quarterback competition with Kyle Trask, and he was fighting for a job. Now he is the guy. He is trusted and beloved by his teammates, by the coaching staff, by the front office. He knows that he doesn't have to keep looking over his shoulder. He doesn't have to worry about that. So he can play a little more freely, a little looser. And then you upgrade the wide receiver 3 position with the drafting of Jalen McMillan, and you bring in Sterling Shepard, who was a big time target for Baker back in college. And now you have more than just Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, who combined for almost 60% of the passing output last year in terms of their receiving yards. So it's kind of the evolution, right, of getting that quarterback in, knowing that he's the guy, and then bringing in Liam Cohen. You're not going to have the stubbornness that you saw with Dave Canales last year. You have Liam Cohen, who's coming from that Sean McVay tree, but he also has some connections with Mike Leach, and you're going to see an interesting combination of the two offenses. And it's an offense that Baker has played in before, so he's already comfortable. He's already ready to roll.
Yeah, now the Commanders have actually seen the Buccaneers a couple times in recent memory, right? Going back to the Super Bowl season for the Bucs, obviously in the playoffs, Taylor Heineke diving for the pylon, getting himself some buzz going there. But then again, the Buccaneers actually able to beat the Commanders rather able to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the regular season not that long ago. So we've seen this Tampa Bay defense, this Todd Bowles defense. We know it's aggressive. We know it likes to create turnovers. But what might be different or what might be a little bit unexpected from the last time Commanders fans saw this Buccaneers defense?
Kind of the youth movement, I guess, with Kalijah Kancey and Yaya Diaby there on the defensive side of the ball. There's no longer any Devin White. He's in Philadelphia. Commanders fans are going to enjoy watching him line up against the Commanders offense because he's not very good. So you have those guys. You have Zion McCollum, who is now a starting corner after an emergence last year, a drastic improvement over his rookie season, and the return of Jordan Whitehead. So you have a lot of different pieces there that all fit exactly what Todd Bowles likes to do. And then, of course, you have the mainstays, Vita Vea, Antoine Winfield Jr., Levante David, Jamel Dean is still there. But it's kind of a new approach in terms of how they're going to get after the quarterback. Shaq Barrett is gone. There's no JPP anymore like the Commanders saw last time. It's almost a edge rusher by committee. It's the same but different because of all of the new youth pieces and then what Todd Bowles likes to call his chess pieces.
The Buccaneers defense obviously has some playmakers on it, right? They've got some really good players, some notables, Vita Vea, Levante David, Antoine Winfield Jr. Obviously, I think most NFL fans knows those guys. We assume, which could be dangerous, but we assume Jaden Daniels will be the starting quarterback week 1 when the Commanders visit Tampa. If the defense in Tampa stifles the rookie quarterback, who is the most important defensive player to doing that?
It's going to be KJ Britt, the guy coming in to replace Devin White as the starting inside linebacker, which, again, we're assuming that is going to be the case. You still have Servassier Dennis from the 2023 draft class kind of breathing down his neck. But KJ Britt played fantastic down the stretch for the Bucs in the second half of the season and into the postseason. And he could really end up being the guy so that Levante can roam free. He can pick up the coverages against running backs out of the backfield or against tight ends. But KJ Britt being able to play that middle of the field area and just kind of make sure that Jaden Daniels isn't getting behind him or isn't getting to the outside without any kind of resistance, he could be a pivotal factor in that game.
And, this conversation is a little bit unique, right? Because with the Panthers, the Saints, and the other team, the Falcons, I can't really get into the game specifics yet. And I know we got a crossover coming up in September, but with this matchup being week 1, I can ask a little bit about the game, even though we're ahead of training camp still. So I want to ask you the flip side of that. If Jaden Daniels and the Commanders come in week 1 and upset the Buccaneers, what do you think is going to be the main reason that the Commanders are able to get that done?
Probably because Todd Bowles and his defensive coaching staff are still trying to figure out the edge rush situation. So Yaya Diaby led the team in sacks last year as a rookie, didn't even play a third of the season. So Shaq Barrett, he's gone. He struggled. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, we still don't really even know what he is. And in a way that tells us exactly who he is. Randy Gregory, no show for mandatory minicamp. That was all over the place that, there was no word from him. No show, no anything. So who knows what his status is going to be. And then the one thing that the Bucs will miss from Devin White is his ability to get into the backfield and get after the quarterback. So without that element at the inside linebackers, and then the questions around the edge rush, that's really where the Commanders are going to be able to take advantage of this Buccaneers defense if Bowles hasn't figured out the right rotation or the right combination of guys that he can get on the field and really solidify those edges.
Yeah, it's going to be real interesting, as is Devin White with Vic Fangio in Philly. That's actually going to be really interesting to see how that whole thing unfolds. But you kind of hinted at Todd Bowles and the Buccaneers and their success or lack thereof against mobile quarterbacks. So share that little tidbit of information. It's a little bit anecdotal, but I mean, the history there is extensive enough that it's almost not anecdotal, right? And not just mobile quarterbacks, but young quarterbacks, which of course Jaden Daniels is both.
Jalen Hurts really dominated the Bucs outside of the playoff game last year in the wild card round. The history of Jalen Hurts against this Todd Bowles defense has been a good one for Hurts. Same with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson just absolutely destroys this team. Taylor Heineke, you mentioned it up at the top when he faced the Bucs in their Super Bowl run. Because of that mobility, he was able to really keep the Washington football team at the time in that game and keep it a lot closer than it probably should have been. And then the history of struggling against young quarterbacks. It's really kind of astounding that, he can be Todd Bowles. I mean, can be so good against some of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game, but then can't seem to figure out, Justin Fields, and almost blows a game against him. Couldn't figure out Daniel Jones. It's so odd how such a brilliant mind can struggle with something that really he should be able to assert his dominance.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is why, spoiler alert, I'm going to predict a Commanders upset in Tampa week 1. Of course, things can change as we get through the training camp and preseason, but we'll see when that crossover lands. Week 1, 2024 NFL season. We will talk to James Jarko again. Then in the meantime, make sure you're checking James out, BucksNation.com and Locked On Bucks 5 days a week. James, thanks for coming through.
Thank you.
Next up, Raheem Morris's name came up during the Washington Commanders head coaching search. He's now with the Atlanta Falcons. And Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons says the coach is bringing a much welcomed new energy to the organization this season. That coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what it takes to bring home the winning trophy in the NFL in any sport, really, if you think about it. It's also what it takes to keep your ride or die vehicle alive. eBay Motors knows this, and today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by eBay Motors. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and even level it up to peak performance. They've got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're looking for speed for your car, power for your engine, or just straight up style, eBay Motors has got you covered. They've got over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. So you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're going to burn rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. I love sports. You love sports. We all love sports, or else we wouldn't be doing this show or watching this show or listening to this show, right? We love them so much. We really never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we do get fewer games, and the sports just simply aren't sportsing the way that we want them to. And for me, FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I got to do is open the app and dream up my bets anytime I'm in the mood and I'm in the game. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with boosts or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. On Tuesday, for example, FanDuel was offering a 105% boost on qualifying parlays. So while my last place NL West hometown Rockies were trailing the Houston Astros on Tuesday night, I was leading in my parlay bid to win me a little bit of money, and which, of course, that's going to cheer up any fan, right? So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view today and every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through like you do on a regular basis. Come back tomorrow. I'm going to have my pre-training camp 53-man roster projection for you, which, again, comes ahead of training camp, so big grain of salt. But that's going to be the start of our position group breakdowns, what we learned during minicamp, how that bleeds into our expectations heading into training camp, what we want to see, all that good stuff. In the meantime, if you need more sports between episodes, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every single day to bring you the biggest sports stories without any of all the screaming or drama that sometimes you get with other networks. You get can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons is here now to talk about the new energy that Coach Raheem Morris is bringing to Atlanta. And yes, we do talk about the top 10 selection of quarterback Michael Penix Jr.
He's brought a different energy into the building, a more fun, youthful energy, I guess you could say. I think the 3 years that he spent in LA has sort of brought a little bit more of that sort of Hollywood, we don't mind the spotlight sort of energy. And I think that's something that is much needed in Atlanta.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Raheem Morris. Something that might not go so well and certainly hasn't gone over so well. We got to talk about it. Michael Penix Jr. in the first round. Kirk Cousins, $100 million man. What did you think of the pick in real time, and what do you think of the pick now?
Well, I've said this many times on other shows that I've been on. I was completely flabbergasted by the pick at the time. I did an episode the day before the draft basically spending 10 minutes explaining on Locked On Falcons why there was no chance that the Falcons would use a top 10 pick on a quarterback, and then they proceeded to do that. So they did an unprecedented thing where we just haven't seen a team be willing to use that type of draft capital on a quarterback with the idea of him sitting for more than 1 year. We've seen plenty of teams use top 10 picks on a quarterback, even number 1 overall picks on a quarterback, that they were like, he'll sit for a year and then we'll get him ready to go in year 2. And because of the amount of guaranteed money that the Falcons have tied up in Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix is supposed to sit for 2 years. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. A lot of that will depend on how well Kirk Cousins plays. But, I think the Falcons' mindset was, we've spent 2 years in quarterback purgatory and never again.
Do you think the Falcons did enough to also help Kirk Cousins this offseason, even if it wasn't in the NFL draft in the first round?
Yeah, I think they've done a good enough job surrounding Kirk Cousins with pieces. Obviously, he's inheriting a bunch of high quality pieces, or at least theoretically high quality pieces. We just haven't quite seen it consistently on the field from players like Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London. And that's one of the things that I think most people expect to change under Zach Robinson, and with Kirk Cousins being able to distribute the ball, Zach Robinson being their offensive coordinator, and then Kirk Cousins being able to distribute the ball to those guys, adding Darnell Mooney, adding Rondale Moore. You add some speed to the room. They needed some speed in the room. And we'll see exactly sort of what those guys are, because in a lot of ways, they're kind of reclamation projects.
Aaron, switch over to the defensive side of things. The Falcons didn't completely ignore the defense. In fact, they actually did a good amount of drafting in the defense. Second round pick, Rook Ororo. Not just because his name is awesome to say, but because of his tape, was one of my favorites coming out in the NFL draft. What do you see his role being, and how are you hearing he's fitting into the NFL so far?
Yeah, the Falcons definitely tripled, quadrupled, dipped on their defensive line. That was probably their biggest need going into the draft, getting the pass rusher. I think that's what most people thought they would use that top 10 pick on. And, they weren't able to get one of the top edge rushers in this draft class. And so it's the idea of like, hey, if we just spread the wealth elsewhere, we'll be able to make up and compensate for that sort of single individual player. And I think Rook Ororo is a big part of that. The Falcons aren't getting any younger at the D tackle position. They have the 2 best pass rushers are Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata. And both of those guys kind of wore down over the course of the season because they were playing so many snaps. And I think one of the goals of the Falcons was to get some fresh legs into that room.
But I got to look at James Smith-Williams. I don't think Commanders fans would let me get out of here without asking you about James Smith-Williams, how he's fitting in so far, and what your expectations for him entering this season with the Falcons.
So far, it's been relatively quiet for James Smith-Williams. And we'll see if maybe he can make a little bit more noise in training camp. And typically, defensive line play, trench play during OTAs is pretty much non-existent because guys aren't really able to contact one another. So it's not a surprise that James Smith-Williams has sort of flown under the radar so far. I think we'll see sort of exactly what role he's expected to have. He's going to be expected to be part of the rotation, but there's a realistic chance that he could wind up starting over some of these other younger outside linebackers that the Falcons are hoping are going to step up, just because James Smith-Williams is a little bit more proven.
Unlike the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons, there's not a whole lot of high expectations for the Carolina Panthers, but another new coach in the division comes in with Dave Canales heading over to Carolina after being the offensive coordinator for the Buccaneers last season. Julian Council of Locked On Panthers is here to talk about more good energy entering an NFC South team, but doesn't maybe give it as much credit as the Falcons are giving it with Raheem Morris.
Energy, man. Everyone loves his energy, what the kind of passion he's brought to all of this, but that's all well and good. Are you going to win games on Sunday? So it's hard for me to say. On paper, it looks nice. The fact that he was able to get the best out of Geno Smith, who had been a journeyman after leaving New York, and then he's gotten paid. Baker Mayfield, we saw him in Carolina the year prior, 2023, and he didn't look like an NFL quarterback anymore, not at least not starting level. Then last year, had career highs in passing yardage, passing touchdowns, completion percentage. He was outstanding for Tampa, and then he got paid. So on paper, it looks good. All the things that he says, I love how open he is with the media. But that's not all that important if you don't win games.
Yeah, hopefully Dave at least gets a full season before, any drastic decisions. Bryce, a lot of pressure. He's a quarterback, so always the pressure is on him. Do you feel like he's in a situation now, better situation than year one?
At age 33, Adam Thielen should not be getting 130 plus targets, but that's what happened last season out of necessity. I do think things are better getting Deontay Johnson, who's proven himself to be a Pro Bowl caliber type receiver. So to have him, to have Adam Thielen, we'll see what they get out of Xavier Legette, the first round rookie out of South Carolina. He didn't do much in his college career until last year. And there's a couple reasons why that could have been the case, but still kind of 1 year sample size, this guy playing at a high level. Jonathan Mingo's second round pick last year at Ole Miss did nothing. There's not a lot of depth behind Thielen and behind Johnson, at least as far as proven players. So I do think bringing in Robert Hunt, Damian Lewis at the guard spots, that's going to help. Having Austin Corbett over to center, we'll see how that works. But Ike Kwan is going to get back to playing at a high level like he did his rookie year. Taylor Moton's been the beacon consistency the last 6 seasons at right tackle. I think it's a better situation for Bryce Young, but still, there's a lot of questions with the offensive personnel and whether there's enough talent on the outside for him to be able to have the kind of success that people would hope at a number 1 overall pick.
Defensively, Brian Burns, the latest Carolina Panthers, really great Carolina Panthers player to be sent out. Fortunately for me, because I'm a football fan, I get to watch him twice this year play the Washington Commanders. Unfortunately for the Washington Commanders, they got to face him twice. What does this Carolina Panthers defense look like in 2024?
Ooh, it's going to be interesting. Derek Brown comes back off a Pro Bowl season and set the record for the most tackles by a defensive lineman in the NFL. Now, granted, they've only been tracking the stats since like 1990. So I'm sure maybe back in the day, amount of running that was been done in the NFL, somebody maybe matched that total or exceeded it. Who knows? But he was outstanding for them. He gets rewarded handsomely this offseason. They bring in Ashawn Robinson, who's known to be a run stopper, and this team was pretty bad against the run. They were 31st, according to EPA, against the run last season. Now, the numbers maybe not looked as bad when you look at just the normal stats that we're used to, but they weren't good against the run. The first 6 games, they gave 130 plus on the ground. Aaron Jones ran all over them late in the season in that game where Bryce actually looked good, but the defense couldn't get a stop. So Brown, I'm expecting to play well. Shai Tuttle, he was a bust for them last year after they gave him a deal, and the deal was done so poorly where they couldn't get out of it, where they could have got rid of him this offseason. So he needs to step up and look more like the player he was in New Orleans, and then Ashawn Robinson has come in and help him stop the run. So I think they should be better against the run. It's just about getting after the passer I have my concerns about.
Finally, we turn to the New Orleans Saints, who are at a crossroads of sorts with a lot of thoughts that they might have a new head coach and quarterback if this season does not go well. Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints breaks down the situation down in NOLA. Coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, our NFC South offseason catch-up, part of our series of catching up with the 2024 opponents of the Washington Commanders. We're wrapping this whole thing up looking at the New Orleans Saints. Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints, is here. If the Saints are not the favorites to win the division, they're not going to be the favorites to finish last. They have to finish in the middle, right? So I'm asking Ross, how good is this New Orleans team looking today?
Well, they're not like excellent, if that means anything to you at all. This is a team that's really kind of going through an entire change of perspective and sort of change of point of view in terms of who they are. I mean, the defense is still very much the identity of this team. It's still the DNA of this team. I don't think that that's going to change. I think that's still the thing that you bet on. But the offense, I mean, they've made some major changes over there. So I guess if you're looking for like a shorthand in terms of how to look at, how you refer to this team, I would definitely still say that like their identity is their defense and their strength on the team, but they are trying to work themselves into that sort of upper echelon of productivity when it comes to the NFL's best offenses.
New offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, coming over from San Francisco, part of the Shanahan tree, very good tree to pluck a coach from. I was hoping at some point during the Washington Commanders coaching search that they would pluck that same apple from the same tree. Pretty happy with Cliff Kingsbury over here in Washington so far. How are you and how is New Orleans feeling about Clint Kubiak so far?
Yeah, a lot of, I'll say positivity, right? Positivity in that things are on the up right now, as opposed to optimism, hoping that things will traject upwards at a later time. And so I would say that things right now are very positive around Clint Kubiak. He's introduced a lot more motion, a lot more mechanics to this offense, disguise to this offense, which is kind of the bread and butter of the defense, is its disguise, looking the same pre-snap with every look and no matter what the play call is and things like that. So I would say things are really positive. It feels very much like this is now an offense that instead of trying to jam its top players and its playmakers into specific roles, they're instead a lot more focused now, again, kind of back like the Sean Payton days of building the roles around what's going to elevate the talent of the player. So I think that has gotten the roster very excited. I've even heard from players, and David, not a lot of players would say this, and maybe not a lot of fans would consider this an actual factor when it comes to success in season. But I've heard a lot of players highlight this new offense as fun, like they're having a blast being out there and playing. And I do think that moves the needle for you.
Let's talk about some young guys here. There's actually 4 specific players new to the Saints this year that I want to talk about, but we'll start with the rookies. Commanders fans are gonna be really jealous when I mention this, but you're covering a first round left tackle, Talisi Fuaga out of Oregon State, one of my favorites, out of range, I think, of the Washington Commanders to draft anyway, but a first round left tackle nonetheless. And you get a second round cornerback in Kool-Aid McKinstry, another coveted position and round that the Commanders fans wanted. Granted, they got slot corner Mike Sainer still. How are those two guys specifically folding into what the Saints are trying to do this year?
Yeah, I mean, look, is there anything more New Orleans Saints than a first round offensive tackle and a second round defensive back? The answer is no, just so that you know. Those are very New Orleans Saints selections. And of course, trading up to go and get that cornerback, even more so, very New Orleans Saints-y. Look, Taliesin Fuaga is a guy that has, has a lot of starting right tackle experience during his time at Oregon State, is very, very comfortable in this wide zone type of system, very similar to what they did over there at Oregon State as well. Now they're moving him over to the left side, effectively swapping a first-round pick from a few years ago, Trevor Penning, from the left side to the right side, in the hopes that maybe like fresh start, blank canvas kind of approach might help, might work with him. But they love what they've seen so far in Fuaga. He moves really well. He's aggressive. He climbs to the next level, gets off the ball quickly, understands his assignment, understands the scheme and what he's being asked to do, and is one of those guys that is just having a lot of fun doing what it is that he loves to do. And so they're really, really pleased with what they've seen from him so far, especially with having moved him over to left tackle, which can be a bit of a stressful transition, right? You're the blind side protector for Derek Carr now, but he seems to be handling that well. Kool-Aid McKinstry is going to be more interesting to watch as training camp gets here. He hasn't been able to participate in anything in the offseason thus far, as he's been rehabbing the foot injury. The New Orleans Saints are very, very, very cautious in dealing with offseason injuries, so they will keep a guy off the field for much longer than maybe other teams would in these situations. But training camp, that's the expectation, is when he'll be out there, and he's expected to compete in the slot. He's expected to compete out wide. He's probably just going to be the 4th corner on the roster. The Saints love having 4 guys that they can go to, particular matchups, injury, whatever it might be. And so that's the way I would see him fitting in right now, but certainly we'll get a better look at that come training camp.
Awesome. And then 2 new players on the team that are not rookies, former Washington Commanders. You got Khaleke Hudson, the linebacker out there, who had a nice little cult following here in Washington. And then, of course, you got Chase Young, who probably the most polarizing player that Washington's seen. I know Chase has been going through some medical stuff, but what can you tell Commanders fans about those 2 guys?
Yeah, I'll start off with Chase because he's obviously the bigger name out of the 2. No disrespect to Khaleke Hudson, but it is Chase Young after all. But yeah, he had the neck procedure in the offseason. Really good sort of news coming in a recent checkup. He'll be reevaluated right before training camp, but the expectation was originally that he'd be ready to go for the season. The expectation now is that he'll participate in training camp, which is really, really good news. And the Saints need sort of that additional rotational player that can come in and maybe help to bolster their pass rushing ability as well as their run stopping ability. Look, they were bottom 3rd in the NFL in run defense last year. And for the first time since 2017, they finished the season with less than 40 sacks. And typically they hit those 40 sacks within 16 games when the schedule added an additional game. So that was a big drop off for them last year. And Chase Young is expected to be able to come in and help with that, and then possibly hit the free agency market the year after that and then shape up for a nice compensatory pick for the next season for New Orleans. So it's all good. They did attach a whole bunch of incentives to his contract based on play time and all those other things. So for every game he appears in, basically he gets X amount of money. And so that's the way he's going to make his money in 2024. As for Khaleke Hudson, I expect Khaleke Hudson to make the roster. This is a linebacker room that has its 3 starters, all 3 very good players: DeMario Davis, Pete Werner, former Kansas City Chief Willie Gay, who was also added this offseason. And then now you're trying to load up kind of the backside of all that. Khaleke Hudson being a guy that has starting experience from his time in Washington, and of course being a premier special teamer in the league as well, especially with the now kind of heightened importance of the kickoff with the new kickoff rule, which was a New Orleans Saints head coach that kind of pioneered all of that as well. I think Cleve Hudson's a surefire fit for this New Orleans Saints team.
All right. Once again, that was Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints. Before him, Julian Council of Locked On Panthers, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, and my buddy, your pal, James Jarko of Locked On Bucks. The NFC South covered tight by the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you check those guys out. Coming up tomorrow, my pre-training camp 53-man roster projection, which will help facilitate the future conversations we're going to have about each position group, how they did in minicamp, what I saw, what I think, and what I want to see upcoming in training camp. So we got a lot still to cover, even though this is the quote-unquote dead period. And yes, the Washington Commanders made some personnel moves on Tuesday. We will discuss those as well on our next episode. So make sure you come through for that. If you got questions or comments, throw them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders to do that today. Don't forget, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen, your first view today and every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.